Hello and welcome, and it is finally here, the year's most thrilling event, the Women's Candidates. 8 world-class players, 14 grueling rounds, and for the winner, the chance to challenge for the Women's World Championship crown. It's going to be history in the making. And I'm going to be your host, International Master Ivanka Haska, and here to call all the action alongside me, it is the one and only International Master, Kasia Corley. Casa, are you excited about this?
Hey, Jovi, I'm so glad to be with you today. The games are going to be awesome. The players, the storylines are just amazing. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to seeing great chess.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to a different event because this is a completely new format. It's a double round robin tournament. The players have earned their spot through different qualification paths over 2023 and 2024. The winner, as I mentioned, earns the right to challenge four-time Women's World Champion Ju Wenjun for the crown later this year. And there is a massive 250,000 euros prize pool. This is going to be insane. Casa, this tournament format has never been seen before.
Yeah, it's very different for a few reasons. One, I'd say, the last few years we definitely departed from the knockout system of the past. So now we're getting, really a round robin where 14 rounds, you really do figure out who the best player is. There's no luck or fortune involved. And then the time control is a little bit different. We actually have a situation where there's actually 90 minutes for 40 moves and then just 30 minutes in a second time control. So it's a relatively quick pace. And they voted on this.
So they did vote for this. And as you mentioned, it is different. And for the first time ever, the women are going to be playing alongside the open candidates. So it is showtime for 8 participants. And talking about showtime, let's check out the first round pairings. And there you can see Katerina Lagno she will be placing off against Alexandra Goryachkina. Nurgil Salimova will be playing Anna Muzychuk. Tan Zhongyi against Lei Ting-Jie. Humpy Koneru against Vaishali. So we're going to be looking at some fighting chess already at the beginning. What catches your eye, Casa?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Compatriots play each other in the early rounds of round robin candidates matches. Why is that? Because when the event is tight, they don't want players playing from the same countries. The double-edged sword with that early on is that these players know each other really well, and you wonder how much that affects their decisions in terms of opening choice and so on. So I'm curious in the Russian matchup between Goryachkina and Lagno, or the Chinese matchup between Ting-Jie and Zhongyi, or the Indian matchup between Vaishali and Humpy Koneru, what that means for their decisions early on.
Yeah, exactly. And your home can actually guess for what this means because you can win prizes by voting on who'll win before every round by going to each game on FIDE candidates and FIDE women's candidates events pages, find the social tab and pick your winner. Go.chess.com/candidates votes. You only have a couple of minutes to do this before the games begin. So that's go.chess.com/candidates votes. Go and pick your choices. Oh, I can't wait for this one, Casa.
So I
I
gotta
think
ask
it's
you,
going to
I
be
gotta
awesome.
I gotta ask you,
Yeah.
who are your picks really quickly? Do you have a favorite in this round or a favorite overall in the tournament?
Yeah, okay, so I think because it's the first round, a lot of the players are going to be nervous. So I suspect there will be a lot of first round draws. But Anna Muzychuk does have the white pieces against Nurgil Salimova. So I suspect that she's going to push hard for that one. Nurgil Salimova, just 20 years old, but she is the lowest rated participant by far. But I suspect that Lei Ting-Jie and Tang Zhongyi, they're best friends. They're old rivals at the same time, but it's first round. You can see the players there. They're going to be smiling at each other and enjoying getting ready for the chess.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. Actually, Nurgil Salimova knocked out Muzychuk, if I'm not mistaken, in the World Cup. So I don't know if there's a little bit of a revenge factor there as well. We'll find out.
We certainly will find out. And Anna Muzychuk, she's ambitious. Her dream has always been to become a women's world champion. Her sister managed it. I wonder whether she will manage to at least win the candidates and challenge for the spots. And there we see the players. They are getting ready. Alexandra Goryachkina and Katerina Lagno. And fun fact, actually, Katerina Lagno has never beaten Alexandra Goryachkina before. It's going to be an uphill task, though, to do it with the black pieces.
Yeah, I was trying to think about what opening might come on the board in this one. You actually told me off camera that Goryachkina was actually experimenting with her white openings the past year or so. I always thought of her more as like a D4 player, and so I'm actually going to predict a Queen's Gambit declined in her game against Lagno. I just some reason I feel like I've seen Lagno trot that out quite a bit, and so that'd be my prediction for that one.
I predict something along those lines. Goryachkina, as you mentioned, has been experimenting with e4. Perhaps that's just to round out her style. As you mentioned, her style is very positional. But we do know that Lagno's second here is Andrei Esipenko. So if Alexandra opens up with e4, perhaps e5 is on the cards.
Yeah, no, I'd reckon that would be the choice. I'd reckon that'd be the choice, especially in the early rounds. It's also about, I think, feeling out your opponents. Getting into the tournament. Of course, the candidates is a totally different beast than almost any event really out there, frankly. But I think it's the same where and sometimes in the early rounds in particular, a loss is just the thing you want to avoid above all else. And I feel like sometimes the losses that you avoid are sometimes more valuable than the wins you actually notch in certain moments.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to be getting off on the wrong foot. And there we see the players. We're waiting for the action to begin. And I do agree with you, actually. It's very important not to lose. So I suspect that people will be making very solid opening choices just to get over those first round opening nerves. And there we are seeing that first move on the board, and it is e4. Are we going to see e5? Is my opening prediction, or is Katerina gonna go for her more usual Sicilian?
Man, I would be. This is already a little bit of a surprise, but
C5.
we got Sicilian. Okay, all right. So they're fighting right off the bat. There's going to be a little bit of a asymmetry right away. And what Sicilian is it going to be? I guess is I feel like I've seen Lagno play some e6 related
She
things,
has.
some Taimanovs,
Yeah, yeah.
some.
Taimanovs,
So
yeah.
wow, wow.
Wow. I love how they're already gone for a combative style. Knight f3. So already we're going to see it, perhaps an open Sicilian e6. Has that have been played? Knight
Knight
c6.
c6, another surprise. Okay, so to me, when I see knight c6 and it's already like, okay, maybe my opponent's been playing e6, I would tend to play Rossolimo here because I don't want black to be able to have the ability to choose which Sicilian line it is, whether it's a Sveshnikov or a Richter Rouser, classical Sicilian type of structure. So I would be reluctant to give my opponent the opportunity of choosing the path by going bishop b5, which basically would cut out a lot of different options.
Yes, I agree with you. I instinctively would also go for the Rossolimo, except I do know that Alexandra has tried the Rossolimo before. So is this a game of double bluff? If she goes bishop b5, this is perhaps the strategy that Lagno has prepared for. And remember that Lagno is married to one of the world's best players, Alexandra Grishuk, as well. So she certainly does come well armed with a team of seconds.
Yeah, no question. And already there's a bit of a think here, we could say. So this is something. Although I think on
Yeah,
screen, okay,
Rossolimo played.
we got it, we got it. It's and now the really there's a few different paths that are worth talking about. So the absolute main line here. Maybe we could actually show this, but or
Yep.
draw an arrow around this. But the main line here is g6, essentially allowing, inviting the double pawns. Okay, d6. Wow. So D6 is usually like the third most popular choice, I would say. Normally see G6 or you see E6. Um,
Right.
D6 is an interesting choice. Um, Typically here the structures actually turn a little bit into Chagora and Rui Lopez structures because usually when you play D6, you actually do wind up putting a pawn on E5, and um, it's a different game. White normally plays C3 and D4. Joey, do you have any experience with this stuff?
Yeah, I was trying to rack my brains, and I think I had prepared when I played the Rosalima a long, long time ago, C3 and D4. But then your idea of a E5 would take Lagno back into familiar territory. And then I was also trying to remember whether there were any castle kingside C4 ideas. So
Mm, yeah,
yeah,
that's different. That's different. There's also I actually had a game and also in the structure with black once. Actually, at we've actually met at the Reykjavik Open before. I actually had a game at the Reykjavik Open against Ariantari with black, and I played this way with D6 because it's a little less popular, and wound up going for this like Bishop D7, Knight F6, A6 type of dynamic.
maybe you
So you
can
don't
show us how the game went. Maybe so. What did Ariane play? Did he castle?
So he definitely I feel like he castled um and then what did I do? I think I went bishop d7. It's weird because with the board I remember much better when it's on my side, because I had the black side. So but it was I think it was bishop d7, rook e1, um a6, bishop f1. This is the typical dynamic where you tuck the bishop back to f1, and then knight f6, um and then c3, um, bishop g4, and etc. I'd say,
Yeah, yeah.
and you have it's an interesting game where a lot of times white sometimes gets the bishop pair. If white goes for h3 very early, black sometimes obliges and takes on f3, and then basically says I have good control of the dark squares, so maybe the bishop pair isn't a huge deal. It's not entirely true. White does have the argument of bringing the queen back to d1 eventually, the knight on b1, maneuvering over to f3, and then eventually playing d4 again. But that's kind of the contours of the game. And Ari and I
Mm.
actually wound up playing g5 because the h3 move was a hook that I wanted to kind of pry open the king side with, and it worked out pretty well. But
Yeah.
yeah, totally different story, and maybe likely not that.
Totally different. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And with C3, white is going for that very well controlled D4. So we'll see what type of approach that Alexandra will use after this D6 move. So let's go back to the game position. And whilst Alexandra is thinking, let's maybe go down to the other games. Let's go back to the bird's eye view and have a look at how everyone else has begun. Because, of course, we have 4 matches in progress. So, which one catches your eye already?
So I'm just gonna just very briefly note here. So it looks upper right hand corner against Salimova. We have a Petrov on the board. It looks like we have a Queen's Gambit exchange in the all Chinese matchup, and looks like we have an Italian in the Indian matchup. So I actually would love to go to the Queen's Gambit exchange. It's a old classical setup. The details have changed the past few decades, but man, it's one of those setups that's never going to get truly old. And it's an interesting
Okay.
position on the board already.
Yeah, and it's between Lei Tingjie and Tan Zhongyi. So let's have a look at how that goes. D4, knight f6. And yeah, one of my most favorite games ever played on the black side of the Queen's Gambit exchange variation was your game against Alexander Moisenko.
Oh, I'm very very flattered. I appreciate it. I'll never play a better game in my life. But it's part of the reason I actually love the Queen's Gambit exchange, as we see here, this Carlsbad structure, because it's something I used to be
Mhm.
really afraid of playing against as black. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, it became sort of a strength. And I think the Carlsbad structure for folks at home is defined by this exchange of pawns that happened on d5. So White has a king-side pawn majority and black has a queen-side pawn majority. And sort of counterintuitively, a lot of times you might say, my play is going to be on the side where I have more pawns, where I have that, advantage per se. But a lot of times the characteristic of the game is that white actually tries to, drum up something on the queen side with where the side where they have left pawns, and black tries to drum up play on the king side where they have less pawns. So a lot of times white's playing in a positional way to kind of squeeze on the queen side, and black will sometimes try to get some direct attacks. But it really depends. The style of play here really depends on what white and black do next. So we got to see a few more moves here, and then we can. Oh, and they're on the board, but we can see a few more moves and meaningfully talk about this a little bit more. So bishop
Yeah.
g5 is normal. Bishop e7 is sort of the most popular choice by far, but also a little bit of a more modest one. Uh, and it's early. A lot of times people play c6 first before committing the bishop to e7. Because, as I played in the Muzychuk game, I played bishop d6, which is a bit more aggressive. But bishop e7 is normal. And yeah, it's just a normal way. And then
Yeah.
e3 is also
E3.
normal.
Totally normal, and because there's no contact in the center between the pawns, the play transfers over to the pieces. And so what you're going to see blacks try desperately to get is actually to get this light square bishop into the game. But h6 is very early. Bishop h4, that's what you want to be doing, and then bishop comes out to g4. And I remember Magnus Carlsen trying this, and I tried it myself, inspired by Magnus. And whilst Magnus was very successful, I was not. And it's not necessarily because the queen can come to b3, because then black will just simply go knight to c6. And queen takes pawn. Whoops, let me just put it actually on the board. Knight will come to c6. And if the queen comes to b7, the knight will come to b5. That's one of the big ideas behind this setup. But let me go back. And instead, after queen to d1, I don't think that was chosen. I think she just went queen to c2. And now black is claiming, that this bishop on g4 is into the game. But white, and this is something that I discovered when I was playing on the black side of things. Yes, this bishop gets to g4, but it's going to get kicked around. And ultimately will just be pushed back. And still, there's going to be problems as to what to do with this piece.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, what happens with that light squared bishop. I also would love to just point out this h6 move that was played early, because, the old masters would have really criticized this move. H6 is really a feature of the last, decade, basically, because the old traditional plan was in many ways, as you mentioned, trying to solve that black light squared bishop, was to trade it on f5. And so there was this really convoluted, long plan of basically spinning that knight that's on b8 around to d7, and then to f8, and then to e6, and then pawn g6, and then knight g7, and then finally the bishop on f5 would be traded for its counterpart, typically on d3. And that took forever, and white's in the meantime would get their minority attack off, and it'd be all of that would happen. Nowadays with h6, a lot of times the idea is to actually trade the dark squared bishops pretty early with a knight h5 move eventually, or knight e4 actually. So that's basically the purpose of h6. The drawback to h6 though is that if a white knight lands on e5, it's a pretty annoying, unassailable piece, because you've already played h6. f6 is just out of the question, because then your light squares on the king side, particularly that g6 square, is basically Swiss cheese. So if you can imagine this pawn f7 was just up one square, you'd have this massive hole on g6 that's just intolerable. So that's the one thing you have to think about sometimes when you play this early h6 is, how am I going to contend with this knight that might come to e5 at some point? And because it's a different type of game.
It totally is a different type of game. And yeah, you've got to be careful about knight arriving there. Actually, both sides have to be careful about this knight on e5 because, like I said, because there is no tension with pawns in the center of the board, it's all going to be about pieces. And if black can trade off as many minor pieces as possible, then white's space advantage starts having less of an impact. So let's see how the game continued. So this bishop came out to g4, very provocative move. Queen comes to c2. When in doubt, you should always react calmly. Those were the words of advice by Boris Spassky. Treat the opening with respect, go home, do some work, and then refute it on the next go. But I actually want to say one thing that I didn't quite spot is that Lei Tingjie, she is normally an e4 player, but against Tang Zhongyi in the candidates final of 2023, she switched to d4. So it's interesting, and she's also working with Timur Rajabov. So whether that's had an impact or not, it was a very successful partnership because in the World Championship match against Ju Wenjun, Lei Tingjie played in her very active style, and it went right to the wire. It was only because of one misstep there on the final game that Ju Wenjun became women's world champion once more.
And wasn't she even leading early in the match?
She
So
was
it was,
leading.
I mean, definitely Lei Tengji has the experience. She's won this event before, and so you have to have a lot of, you have to have a lot of tools in the holster to get as far as she has. So not a surprise. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, there we see after castles, h3 being played, the bishop drops back to e6. And this is where I was struggling to make use of this bishop on e6. And so knight to f3. And now the knight comes into e4. And I'm just going to take quick looking at the clock times. We can see that Lei is on 1 hour and 25 minutes, whereas Tang Zhongyi, well in her preparation, she's on 1 hour 31. So this is an interesting position. So
Yeah.
first up,
You
what are
know,
we
I was
going to
just gonna
trade?
yeah, I was gonna mention that the last few moves here, there's been a very nuanced kind of dance to provoke certain things. And so I think the point of this bishop g4 and then back to e6 maneuver, if you're thinking about what did black gain, well, now there are two type of plans in the Carlsbad structure for white. There's the minority attack, which we spoke about, where white plays for b4, b5 ultimately, and then there's this what I call the Botvinnik plan, which is connected to f3 and e4, basically trying to break through in the center on the side where you have more pawns. The thing is, by provoking h3, f3 is not really so simple a plan anymore, because as we were talking about the kings with black's king side, those dark squares, there's like a bit of a Swiss cheese dynamic there. And so it kind of meant that because h3 was provoked, that the Botvinnik plan wasn't as attractive, and that's actually what happened. In my game, Moisenko insisted on trying to play the Botvinnik plan. It doesn't work all the time, and so it forced white to actually put the knight on f3 and basically play the different plan. So that's kind of the dynamic there. The minority attack also is not so useful if the pawn is still on c7. There's nothing to chip away at. And so
Mhm.
in some respects, the delay of playing c6, you could say that at some juncture, black might actually consider playing c5 in one go, which is really interesting. And also, the bishop can't go back to g3 ever because it has f takes g3. So the h3 getting h3 as a tempo, it feels amazing, but black definitely got what they wanted out of it, and now there's an initiation in the center with these piece trades where white still isn't castled yet. So snacking on e4 a few times is a bit riskier with a queen coming to b4 check potentially.
Yeah, so we have to also dive into this particular position because I think it's a pawn sacrifice, right? If this bishop takes, the queen will presumably capture. Knight takes knight,
Mm-hmm.
and first up, what happens in this? If I get greedy and go for the whole shebang, queen
Yeah.
comes to b4, and then the knight comes to d2.
And
What
b2
is
is
happening
hanging.
here?
b2 is hanging. Then the rook is
B2
attacked.
is hanging,
h2 is
B7 is
also loose.
hanging, rook
Um,
to come to B1. There's consequences. I mean,
It's messy for sure. It's definitely messy, and I do kind of like white side of the mess, to be honest, with this bishop d3 tempo happening, but it's very move by move, and in some positions, actually, black might even try to rip open the center with c5, like, um, as well. So, it's I would say it's best described as unclear, and I think if the level of players that is going for this, Tan Zhongyi is going for this, it's probably still preparation. So you also have to consider if this is relatively new territory, you're just not going to go down the path likely because it just feels murky.
That is true. But on the other hand, if black is allowed to have this knight on e4, living there rent free, then then you feel that black kind of got away with it, and I don't see why black should be any worse at all. Because one of the things I wanted to point out is that the knight's perfect square is actually to put it on d6. There it looks at e4, it also looks at c4, and then it just needs this knight on b8 to get into the game with via d7, f6, and that can be the knight that arrives on e4. So it's let's also just have a look at whether this is a forced line, because it might not necessarily be forced. After bishop takes, bishop, queen takes, knight takes, is there some bishop to f5 ideas as well?
Ooh, that is
So
definitely a tricky one. It's just taking advantage of that pin there. Um,
then I didn't know about knight to f6. I've been trying to do my puzzle rush survival every day. I get a bit addicted to beating
all right, all right.
certain
Well,
family members' high score, which I haven't managed.
yeah, I mean, my instinct is to suggest that the bishop on f5 is not as good as it was.
Okay.
Is not as great if because eventually, if you have to recapture with the pawn, I'm not sure why the bishop is so great there. So even something
Oh,
like
yeah.
knight fd2
Knight to 2. Yeah,
or
knight f to d2.
rook
Okay.
c1 or something. I don't know. It just
Yeah,
um, But again, that
that's
h3
true.
pawn serves as a hook. I cannot say this enough. And so many of these crossbar structures, black a lot of times their counterplay comes from getting stuff going on the king side, which seems ridiculous. But it happens way more often than you'd think, and there are a lot of engine games to back that up. Frankly,
Okay. Let's have a look. I'm sure that Lei J would have come to something. I'm not getting the refresh button to work. No. But let me just quickly go back and let me change to this position, and let's have a look at what's happened. Bishop takes bishop, queen, it takes bishop, and now it's, oh no, that's my analysis. So hang on, wait a second. After knight to e5, what was played? So it was knight takes knight and then bishop takes bishop.
yeah, and actually very very different and interesting path because after knight c5, both bishops are hit. The e6 bishop on and the bishop on h4, and frankly, you have to kind of decide which one you want to keep. And bishop c8 is a really creative and kind of classy way to kind of keep the king side tidy. I This is a new position to me. Very original because basically, black has retained the bishop pair for the moment. White can actually play late can play knight takes h4. Um, but it's a very creative thing to just move the bishop all the way back just to cover the b7 pawn. Really,
Mhm.
this is unique stuff.
It is unique, completely, but it's it's a kind of, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with black's position, even though they've wasted a lot of time with a light squared bishop. I mean, the pawn structure is solid. They've changed off a whole load of pieces. So if white were to ever go knight takes bishop, then okay, yes, no biggie there, because black is simply gonna boot away this knight on c5. This knight will get into the game, and this light squared bishop. Okay, it's a bad piece, but it's a great defender. That's what they say. Bad bishops make good defenders, and then it's such a simple type of position that I don't feel that this bad bishop on c8 actually has that much of an impact on the position.
Right, and
And even you can go knight to d7 and just offer up a trade of knights.
Yeah, and I'm honestly I'm looking at the clock times here, and Tan Zhongyi still is above a minute, an hour 30, and so I suspect that she's seen something close to this, if not this position before. And perhaps we should actually look at another game because this one is
Yeah.
Lei might be in the tank here for a minute. So,
Okay.
but
Let's
very
just
interesting stuff.
definitely let's go back to the bird's eye view and have a look at the two other games that we haven't checked out. So, Salimova Muzychuk
Yeah,
and
that is a hot Petrov theory. I know a little bit about that position there. They're both are basically in book right now. Frankly,
okay. Let's go
um,
there then.
yeah, this is a really interesting position. And it's not there's nothing really new under the sun, I would say here just yet. Um, we could take it from the beginning, or perhaps, and I can explain some of
Yeah.
the dynamics. So, yeah, I knew that just from the structure, there's no question it came out of a Petrov. So, e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6. That this is the Petrov, folks. The black plays a little bit of copycat for the time being, but not for too long. I assume knight takes e5 happened, or d4. No,
D4
excuse me. This is
happened.
no d4 is the way this goes. Knight takes e4. Uh, bishop d3, d5 happens to defend that knight. Actually, funnily enough, I'm just for the just for giggles here. D5 is not the only move. There's a funny move I once analyzed instead of d5 here, which is knight c6. And the idea is that after bishop takes e4, you can go d5. It's not as good, admittedly, but I just felt that's a cute thing to point out. There's a fork on e4 if the bishop moves. Wherever the bishop moves, it's gonna be attacked. Um, yeah, it's another story. But
Okay.
anyway, so d5, knight takes e5. Um,
Yeah, I'm going to, yeah, just gonna, okay, here you go. There you
yeah,
go.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, so yeah, you're in that games view. Yeah, so then
Yeah,
knight takes
I think that
e5.
was the issue. I was in
Yeah,
the wrong.
that's the pleasant one to navigate out of for sure. Um, so yeah, so knight takes e5, and then typically here you try to get rid of the knight on e5 expeditiously. It's a little bit of a nuisance, and so knight d7 is played to do that. And uh, there are actually two. There's actually where there's a first little diversion. Some people play one of the other ways to play this position is knight c3 right away, which is a very different position. The point is that you allow black to actually capture on e5, and you have this pawn on e5 that's kind of like an attacking wedge. But then uh, white structure is a little bit worse in an end games. It can be a little bit dangerous because there's knight takes c3 here, b takes c3, and then bishop c5, and the games tend to explode from here. I've had some on the black side myself. White usually uses that e5 pawn as a wedge. There's usually some queen h5 ideas shortly after black castles, and there's some rook b1 ideas to tickle the b7 pawn. And black basically has this job of like surviving the initial onslaught, and if you're able to do that, you have really excellent prospects in endgames. And so, I mean, the pawn structure is a little compromised. So white's kind of banking on their activity to kind of win the day. What happens in the game, though, with knight takes d7, it's actually a little bit of a safer choice, and I almost would go as far as to say it's a two results choice, because the path that follows from this position is one that carries on for a few moves. So the bishop recaptures on d7, white castles. So the next few moves are bishop d6. That's usually the active square for the bishop. That's what Salimova played, and then knight c3. And this position is, you might say, well, knight c3, why are you voluntarily doubling your c pawns? Well, there's two things. One, the double c pawns can be easily erased actually with c4. So once the b takes c3 happens, you can kind of undouble them quickly. No harm, no foul. The more important thing is the activity, though. So when black castles here, white goes queen h5. And here's the dilemma that black has. The d5 pawn is hanging. So, and more importantly, checkmate is threatened with queen takes h7. So you have a decision. Do you want to sacrifice a pawn with g6 and give up the d5 pawn and say, okay, maybe I can survive there? Or do you want to keep your material and play f5? And this f5 move weakens a lot of squares on the e file. It makes e5 and e6 soft. And I always say, whenever you move a pawn, whenever you move any piece, you're moving it away from squares it was previously defending, and it's all the more important with pawns. So when you move a pawn one square, you weaken two squares, the squares adjacent. When you move it a pawn two squares, you weaken four. So f5
Mhm.
weakens e5 and e6, which we're highlighting now, and g5 and g6. And these offer white avenues to really tickle, black's camp. And so those factors really make this honestly a bit of a two results game, because the f5 is really a chronic liability. And I in the back of my head, I can't help but think of Feingold, don't push the f pawn, because it really does become a bit of a two results game. And white really tends to try to trade these dark squared bishops next. If you can imagine the dark squared bishops just lift off the board, e5 is weak, f4 is weak. You could build on these sensitive dark squares. So tough
You'd
position for
you'd
black
see
to play
moves
right
like first up, white would try to control the e line, and then secondly, maybe make moves like bishop f3, queen to f3, bishop f4, trade of dark square bishops, and then plonk a rook into e5, and then continue with life. And yeah, it's a tale of two bishops, isn't it? The light square bishop on d3 has targets. This one on d7 doesn't. So I guess Black has to really fight that by making moves like c6, stabilizing the center, putting a queen on c7, saying no trade for you today, and uh, and then just holding, seeing what Anna will throw at her. Interesting decision there.
How do you feel about holding though? Because personally, I'm always a bit wary of, like, I think a human perspective is to kind of do stuff. And what type of person are you? Are you comfortable being in like a defensive posture for basically 40, 50 moves with very little counterplay? Because that's what this is.
Well, I'm half that because I'm a Caracan player. So sometimes you'll see me against the advanced, just holding as much as I can, waiting for that opportunity to strike. But yeah, I agree with you. There is the urge to rush things and do something. That's just human nature. And if you master the art of doing nothing, you can actually practice this by improving your endgame play, because that sometimes is just waiting around, just waiting for your opponent to make a mistake, or just trying to trick your opponent. But I do see that there have been a few more moves played after f5. Rook to b1 was played, a nice move actually, and after b6, because after moves like rook to e1 was which I was suggesting, then after c6 there is this like perfect pawn structure. I say perfect because I'm a Caracan player and I love to put my pawns on light squares. It is like my modus operandi. But so I like rook to b1, b6. I can't get my beautiful light square strategy going on. And after, so rook to b1, b6, rook e1, c6, bishop to g5, queen to c7, and now we see c4. So it's Anna who's doing something. Anna is the one that's trying to open up the position. And how does Salimova react?
It's still a bit of a holding pattern, frankly. I think as black, you really want to kind of hold the fort down best you can. So my instinct would be to try and trade all of the rooks, and you starting with rook a8 would be kind of the really logical, sensible way. You might feel compelled to try and harass the dark squared bishop on g5, maybe go h6 or something, but you have to worry about some sacrifice. So I've seen bishop takes h6 as a theme in some of these positions, and you could do that in conjunction with a rook lift on e3, and it might just be lights out. So It's a very, very careful kind of play here is required from black, and I'm a little worried about Salimova's time usage, given that this position, I can tell you that, especially after queen h5 f5 has been seen hundreds of times before. Actually, I remember this game between uh, uh, Nepo won a really nice game against Yu Yengi, I believe, in the structure. I can't recall whether it was a World Cup or or an Olympiad, but it's one that it. The reason I think Nepo's notable for this is because he's I have the Carrick on the tip of my tongue. He's a Petrov expert, right? He really essayed the Petrov to great effect in the last candidates event in the last few years, and he decided to play this way with white against the Petrov. So it gives you some perspective about where the challenge is. I always like to say where the bodies are buried. If you know where the
Mhm.
bodies are buried, it's scary.
Yes. I just also, on the subject of the Petrov, I just want to mention that this isn't Salimova's usual repertoire. She's actually a Caracan player by trade. And so I have seen her experiment with e4, e5, but not so much a Petrov. So this is perhaps why Anna Muzychuk chose this line. It's a two results game. Anna, incredibly theoretical. She knows her openings inside and out. And also, one thing about Anna's play is that she tends to be a little bit risk averse. So if you do surprise her in the opening, she will go for that stable, solid advantage. And she's not afraid of making a draw. That's been my experience playing her. So a tense game and big questions on Salimova on how she's going to handle this poor piece on d7 and how she's going to continue. Is she going to go rook a to e8, try to challenge on the open file, or is she perhaps going to play very provocatively and go h6? I would love to see h6 on the board because then it's really throwing down the gauntlet to Anna saying, hey, are you going to sacrifice a piece and open up the position? But somehow I suspect that we might see rook a8 on the board. But maybe we go back to the bird's eye view and check out that one game that we haven't looked at, which is the All Indian derby between Humpy Koneru and Vaishali.
Yeah, and yeah, that one is actually sharpening up a little bit as well. This is another kind of very theoretical adjacent position. I suppose we maybe take it from the beginning just because we didn't spend any time on it just yet. So we wound up getting an Italian, but let's see how we got there. So, because the Italian is all about move orders. So attack the pawn e5, defend the pawn, bishop c4. This is the Italian, bishop c5. So bishop c5 is definitely the main, more solid choice these days. It's just bishop c5 and knight f6. And c3 was played, which threatens d4. Knight f6 is played to kind of thwart the d4 push, so you play d3 instead. And then h6, an early move, which really is not strictly necessary, but basically cuts out any ideas of bishop g5s, which tend to be extremely sharp. So, a lot of times when white bishop comes to g5, black has to essentially play h6, g5 at some point. And Humpy's actually a very, very solid player. She's one that actually I know as well for being an excellent Petrov player. And so she just wanted maybe not to get into those sharper attacking waters where Vaishali can really shine. So he
Exactly.
cuts that out. And then
Yeah,
b4.
totally. And yeah, before I was also going to say that Prague has had many games. I also just saw one just recently in the Prague Open where he went bishop to g5 and then he just sacked a piece. And as you mentioned, Vaishali just thrives in chaotic positions. She's very much from this new generation of Indian players that's all about calculation and finding those imbalances. So b4, bishop e7, and Humpy, on the other hand, she's a lot more of a stable player. She's very aggressive, but in a positional manner. And there's one thing I noticed about Humpy is that she doesn't like it when her king is attacked or his king is unsafe. So knight d2.
Can we talk
What's
about
your?
bishop e7 for 1 second? Because I
Yep.
think a lot of folks know maybe like bishop e7, you brought it out to c5 to go back, and you played
Yep.
h6 already. Why are you going bishop e7 back? And I think it's one of the features of not playing early d6. And so Humpy elected to play h6 on move 5 when she could have played d6 if she wanted to. And I think by playing the bishop on e7, it kind of telegraphs her plan of actually playing for this d5 break, which I think is actually, a little bit cleaner in some ways with the bishop on e7. Um, yeah, just an interesting little nuance and wrinkle there. These the
Yeah.
Italians, the details are crazy.
I mean, the detail is everything, and it's all those small nuances as well. Because I was assuming that she didn't want Bishop B6 because of A4, and that's also another plan that we've lately seen in the Italian, where it's all about just expanding as much as possible on the Queen side, a la Magnus Carlsen, and then just waiting it out and getting into an endgame. I personally find these Italian games very, very difficult to understand and play, and I've try to get enlightenment for a lot of my co-commentators who are very strong grandmasters, and all of them tell me no, they don't understand it either. Bishop b7,
Yeah,
knight
it's different.
bd2, getting ready to perhaps maneuver a knight to better pastures, castles, and now d5. And Humpy plays in a direct style.
Yeah, and it's well timed. I think you basically need to go for that break. Basically, if you play d6 with the bishop inside of the chain, it's essentially a glorified Philidor. Um,
Mhm.
and d5 is the natural break for black in these positions. Usually, if black can get d5 in without any major direct problems, black is very close to equalizing because. Well, it's just the break that you need to execute. And then a lot of times the question then becomes, if there is an exchange on d5, which I don't think there is yet, is the e5 pawn more of a target than the d3 pawn, and vice versa? But also kind of important to point out with this b4 move, b5 was never played, and there were like 3 or 4 opportunities to play b5, and maybe important to point out why attacking the knight on c6 and trying to win the pawn e5 is not very impressive at all.
Yep.
Um, and it's basically because you forfeit a bishop pair with knight a5 essentially, and taking the pawn on e5 leads to disastrous consequences in terms of breaks in the center. And so after knight takes you d5, black's a pawn down, but you could see black as king is castled. Black has the 2 bishops, which are usually an advantage, and especially in an open position. And the position, as you're highlighting, becomes quite ruinous quite quickly.
Yeah, I know. I was just looking at it. You can't capture on d5 because the queen attacks the pawn on d3 and g2. And also, if you go knight to e3, then d4 is just screaming to be played and just again targeting d3. And well, also in this day and age, Lopez players, they are very comfortable giving up a material in order to get the bishop pair. And as you mentioned, b5 is just simply overextending. So yeah, nice call there. So after castles, you don't want to be going b5 and just ruining the integrity of your pawn structure. Don't give squares, and instead castles. And now we have that critical position d5, standoff in the center. I was edging towards e takes d5, probably because I want to be doing something at all times, and then trying to play against e5. But Vaishali chooses to go bishop to b3, and that's the game position. And here, how does one go about playing this? Is b5 now a possibility for white? It's certainly something you need to be considering. Is what do you do with this bishop? Do you put it on e6? Do you put it all the way out to g4? Well, it's probably just going to get harassed. Now I look at it. Or do you
Yeah,
kind of resolve the tension in the center with d takes e4? Very complex.
yeah, just a very complex, and I think given that the exchange didn't happen a moment ago, I suspect the tension will be kept for a little while, and it's kind of like I love to call this like a tug of war or a staring contest, because it's kind of like who will blink first and be the first to kind of upset the apple cart a little bit. Both sides have a lot of useful moves to make, so white and black haven't connected their rooks. Black could play. I love the maneuver with black of always playing like rook e8, bishop f8. It's just a one that's on the tip of the tongue. Give reinforcement to the e5 pawn. light square bishop could go to e6, as you mentioned, or g4. White, on the other hand, needs to play rook e1. They need to play h3, probably. Maybe queen e2. I do not love the bishop on c1 going to b2, even though it's available, because there are a lot of positions where, a knight might land on f4, and you need to be able to kind of, contend with that. So I just don't like the bishop on b2 at all. But that's also a possibility. So I'd be more inclined to kind of spin the knight around to f1 to g3, and the bishop might hang on c1 for a moment.
Yeah, but we're probably expecting a move like rook to e1 from white. But a big question for Humpy, is b5 something that she needs to be worried about, especially because Vaishali is a very combative player. Oh, this is brewing up to be a very nice fight. Wow, I think now that the opening phase has concluded, we are going to take it to a short break. But in the meantime, we have a very special announcement because something exciting is coming your way. It's been seen on Shark Tank. It is a fantastic invention. The Chess Up team returns with a brand new Chess Up 2, an electronic chessboard that combines the best of online and over-the-board chess with built-in Wi-Fi and Chess.com compatibility. Chess Up 2 carries all the convenience of online gaming, like access to the millions of players in the online chess community, without losing the unique experience and feel of over-the-board chess. And when you finish the match on the board, you can save games directly on Chess.com and analyze online. To learn more about Chess Up 2 and unlock $100 off your purchase, head to go.chess.com/chessup2 or use !chessup in chat. And don't get anywhere, because we're going to see you after the break.
Students, did you know that you can get a discount on any Chess.com premium membership? If you're enrolled in a college, university, or high school in a participating country, you can get 50% off any yearly or monthly premium plan, diamond, platinum, or gold. That's unlimited game review, unlimited puzzles, unlimited bots, unlimited lessons, and no ads. All at 50% off. Go to chess.com/students and get your discount today.
Chess Kid is fun. Chess is great for the brain, but it's also fun to play. And Chess Kid makes it easy to have fun. Whether your child is a total beginner or a prodigy, they can hop on and find a well-matched opponent from around the world at any time. Chess Kid is the safe, parent-approved way for your child to play chess online. Chess Kid is educational. To kids, it feels just like playing, but chess is a great way to learn patience, strategy, and critical thinking. Chess Kid features a comprehensive training program that guides kids to level up on their way to mastery. There are more than 50,000 chess puzzles and a whole library of entertaining videos that teach strategies, tactics, openings, and endgames specifically for kids. Chess Kid is easy. Whether you're a parent helping your child, a coach managing dozens of kids, or a school of hundreds. Signing up is free and easy, so what are you waiting for?
We are back in Toronto for the women's candidates, and we've seen opening surprises, we've seen a little nerves, we've seen also the players burn that time on the clock. And one of the players that did spring the opening surprise, it was Katerina Lagno against Alexandra Goryachkina. Now, we left that game pretty early on. Shall we take a peek back and see how that one is brewing?
Yes, definitely. Things have definitely shaped up there since this early d6, bishop d7 surprise. And yeah, it seems like Goryachkina was trying to get a game and steer away from Lagno because we had rook e1, which is normal, knight f6, c3, which is
C3.
also typical, and in a
And
few
after
moves,
a6.
yeah,
Yeah,
bishop f1,
this is what we predicted. Bishop
yep.
f1, e5, and yeah, white is being prevented from going d4 just yet, but then knight to a3.
And this is the move. This is the one that's a little bit different because e5 actually is not the main way to play because it actually doesn't stop d4. You could still do it actually.
Oh,
Normally the way to play is play bishop g4. So e5 here, I think what Goryachkina was reluctant to play d4, why she was reluctant, was you have to work out the details after cd4, cd4, and bishop g4. And this
bishop g4.
pin actually means you kind of have to concede double pawns. And if you haven't actually prepared this, it's a bit of a scary thing to go down, even though you do get the bishop pair. And so I can imagine she was like, Goryachkina was like, I don't want anything to do with this kind of, very, direct path. And I want to go in a different direction.
Yeah. And yeah, for those of you asking, d5 is going to be met by knight to d4. And this is where Castle was talking about accepting the double pawns. But, if you have a bishop on f1, it should be relatively safe. But this is the opening round. You have your jitters. It's like I say, you got to try to warm up in these type of tournaments. Yes, it is a long marathon event, but here the psychology is everything. And knight to d4 would have been a good try for black. So let's go back. So knight to a3 instead of the immediate d4, knight to a3, and then bishop to e7. But also, one of the things I love about these type of events is that we know the players have been working very hard. We know that Goryachkina has been on a training camp. She was promised this because in the last candidates, she didn't get that because of budget cuts. This time, she's had the full training equipment. So I was just thinking, Lagno married to Grishuk, also Yesipenko as a second. Do you go into the main lines or do you try to trick your opponent and take it into paths lesser well traveled? It's like how I like to say it.
It's like the Robert, isn't it Robert Frost, The Road Less Traveled? Isn't it
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
yeah, no, we can talk about poetry here as well. But yeah, no, it's definitely kind of the tug of war in modern chess, right? It's, do I go toward the objectively best path, or do I try to avoid my opponent's preparation because they might know it too? And you're constantly, basically having that internal disequilibrium to kind of, decide which way to do it. I think when you look at this position though, and you look at the structure here, this is very reminiscent of a Ruy Lopez Chigorin variation. And in the Chigorin, I mean, we could make the moves. It might take a few minutes, and we could make the moves. But the dynamic between this position, yeah, okay, so we'll make the moves. Yeah, e4, e5. Knight f3, knight c6. We've all gone down this path before, Jovi, right? At least once. If you know anything about the classics, bishop a4, knight f6. The individual moves don't matter. We're just going to get to the structure. So castles, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, d6,
D3
c3.
or C3, yeah.
Yeah, c3,
Yeah,
castles,
C3, yeah. Castles and then
h3,
yep, and then
knight
knight
a5.
a5,
Mm-hmm.
bishop c2, and c5. Here we
And then
go. We got it.
D4. And this is the typical. And if you compare this one, right, to the pawn structure is very similar. So take this shot and then and then imagine, and then we're going to show you the actual game position, and then look at the pieces and the difference in where the pieces are, and that tells you the story. And so this is the Chigorin. Now let's look at the game position that we're looking at, and the difference is that this bishop is not better on f1 than it was on c2. The c2 on c2 is a little bit more active. It's looking towards the king side. Similarly, the knight on a3 that went to c2 is not as good as it typically is in the Chigorin when it spins around to where it goes to on f1. And similarly, black did not have to waste time tagging the bishop with knight a5, where the knight on a5 is actually pretty misplaced. And so if you just compare the two snapshots, you can concede that, you can note that white has conceded a better version of a Chigorin structure that black might be gunning for. And so it's not a big deal. The white's not done anything, majorly wrong or anything, but black can be pretty happy with the what's happened thus far.
Yeah, I agree with you, but at the same time, it's a close position. Like you say, it's not a big deal. Black has won the opening battle, but still, it's very much going to be about getting that well-timed d4. So after castles makes a lot of sense. h3, and the reason why you go h3 is that you're anticipating for an eventual d4. Now, it's very, very important that you don't just rush with it, because if you rush with it and you're unable to maintain pawns on d4 and e4, then you're going to have to take a step forward, pawn to d5, but then you've clarified the pawn structure. And if a white pawn ends on d5, well, this is just inviting black to eventually go for f5. And if you're forced to capture in the middle of the board, taking on e5 and c5, then you look at who's ready to take control over the D line, and it's not white. So that's why what you're going to see is a kind of game of cat and mouse. So you're going to see Goryachkina just keep waiting until the time is right for her to go d4. If she does it at all, because that's something that Lagno will be thinking about all the time. Will d4 come on this go? Yes, no. But there's one thing though. I did say, it wasn't that much of a big deal, but Lagno is a Chigorin player. She she occasionally experiments with the Breya and Chigorin, so she will be feeling very, very comfortable here in this type of position. Oh, there's also one thing I also wanted to mention. What do we think about this square on d5 for white? Because it's an outpost. So white can
Yeah,
also play for moves like bishop to g5, trade off. Whoops, that was not the move I wanted to highlight. Bishop to g5, and then go bishop takes f6 in order to then generate a knight to e3 and then come into d5.
Yeah, it's funny because you do see that plan in a lot of these closed Ruy Lopez positions with d3. I think one of the key differences, though, is this bishop on f1. So a lot of times when you have these closed Ruy positions, the bishop is on b3 with d3. You have a little bit more rope with fighting for that d5 square in conjunction with just the knight coming to d5. Here, even after bishop takes f6 and the bishop takes f6, black can easily fight for the square with knight e7. The knight on c6 could spin to e7 and fight for the d5 square. The bishop on d7 could also go to e6. And I think the concern that I have for white in this position is if you basically make just a few more kind of nonchalant moves, black will actually be well positioned to go for the d5 break. And we already talked about this rook e8, bishop f8 maneuver. Well, it's on the board with rook e8, and bishop f8's coming. It reinforces the e5 pawn, and Lagno might all of a sudden get ambitious because if d4 isn't played, then for white, what's the knight on c2 doing really? So that's I think what we're going to see next from Lagno, some preparation to build up towards that. Maybe your bishop g5 is actually annoying enough that she says, I'm going to go h6 and not even want to think about it, but I don't think it's actually needed.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of feel like she might do that because it's a luxury move that you can like at least eliminate from your way of thinking, because you don't need to worry about it. H6, bishop to g5, why not? And then you can get on with your plan of going bishop f8 and d5 at the right time.
Right. Right.
Yeah, just force white to come up with a plan, because What is White's plan now I think about it? If it's not bishop to g5?
I'm not sure. I feel like it maybe Goryachkina would switch gears and play d4. And oh, look at that, we have h6 on the board. So h6 was played, basically asking the question. And yeah, if you don't play d4, right, you just have a little less space, and it's not the end of the world, but it's definitely, black is definitely for choice. So
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. If you don't play for d4, I guess you could try something along the lines of knight e3 and then maybe knight h4, knight f5 at some point on a good day, but you're really worried about these sacrifices um, on e4 that expose that knight if but for a moment. So maybe
So
knight
after knight to
e3.
e3, what sacrifice?
So I'm
Are
worried
you
about
talking for
I'm worried about if the
knight
knight
coming
comes to h4, there's some discovery
knight?
for a moment. Yeah. Um, So yeah, I mean, black should be building up towards the d5 pawn break, or building up
Bishop
towards a
e6.
b4 pawn break. Actually, there's some rook b8, b5, b4 ideas as well.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Oh
it's
gosh.
tough. It's tough.
Actually feels like White is the one playing on the black side of things.
It does.
whereas Black has got all the space and
Oh,
all the plans. Whoop.
there's another one. There's another idea actually. It's different because again, it's the bishop on f1 that's getting me, because normally when you have the bishop on f1, you insist on going d4, but there is a plan when the bishop is on c2 of knight e3, knight h2, knight g4, and then the queen comes to f3, and you generate the play that way on the light squares on f5 and so on. So that's another idea: knight e3, knight h2. Um,
Mhm.
and then you tickle the king side without making your knight exposed on h4.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's but I was also kind of inspired by the fact that I feel that White is playing colors reversed. So if that's the case, maybe you need to make moves like a4, try to initiate some set of trades or stop your idea of going b5, b4. I I kind of feel that White has to put the brakes on a little bit. You can't just make random moves like bishop to d2 here. It needs to come with plans, and you certainly can't get ambitious, because I was also thinking that you could try to make use of this bishop being on f1, try to, I don't know, g3, bishop g2, and then go for some kind of d4, but that feels very, very slow, not really to the point.
Might happen though. Might happen though. I mean, it's definitely not the first. Definitely, I think Goryachkina didn't go for this position with knight a3 thinking she was going to turtle it out, and chill in the last three ranks. But maybe the terms and conditions have changed, and she'll wind up doing that.
Yeah. Uh, Also, on that subject, it's actually very difficult to play this type of chess. You can do it with three minor pieces each, but four minor pieces, they always start interfering with each other, and you start getting frustrated with your own pieces, because if you put your bishop on d2, what's it doing there? And you literally spend the whole time looking at it, going, "I don't like you." I don't know whether that's how you think of your chess pieces, but that's what I do when I get this type of position. And yeah, you can put a knight on e3, but then again, it's in the way of this bishop. And unless you're coming up with a concrete plan, you're stuck.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. The
and if there's
bishops.
one thing I've learned in my years of commentary is never underestimate the power of a human mind to come up with creative solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't want to even start to offer or essay some of these creative solutions, because I know they're not good. But yeah, we're gonna see. We're definitely gonna see in the
We're going to see
next.
it actually, because knight to e3, bishop f8, your suggestion played. And now the ball is in Goryachkina's court. What is she going to play? Knight h2. I like that idea that you suggested. It makes a lot of sense. Knight h2 to go knight to g4. Try and trade off some pieces at least.
Yeah, and it's really to me the only really logical plan, frankly. I should point out that when you put the knight on g4, for the one from h2, that is, you are going to take with the h pawn. The point is that you really reinforce the f5 square to such an extent that you're eventually going to try and land a piece there. And then you also have this really neat idea at some juncture of going g3, king g2, and then one day swinging the rook over to h1 on a really good day and attacking along the h file. So it takes a lot of moves, and black is almost certainly not going to oblige and capture on g4. But that would be kind of the best case scenario.
Yeah. And yeah, and all of those lines, I couldn't help but thinking about this bishop on f1. It's not a good piece. You want it on b3, fighting for the d5 square. And I must admit, I'm also very worried by going knight to h2 that you're kind of committing to working on the king side without taking due care on the queen side. That b5 might just allow black quite an overwhelming space advantage there. So it's decision time for Goryachkina. Does she go knight to h2, accept that b5 is going to come, and that, yep, knight h2 played?
So yeah, so it's all happening. We're doing all right as predicting so far. And yeah, I think in the next few moves you're going to see a knight land on g4, and I think Lagno will actually spend a moment here because this is a critical position. If you're able to solve the knight g4 problem or address it meaningfully, you're going to have a great position to work with because it's really the one idea that is in the position right now. So I actually think we can actually move from this one for a bit because I think Lagno will spend at least a decent chunk of time here.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's decision time for her as well. And well, my eye is drawn immediately to the Salimova Muzychuk game because I'm thinking, what happened to the light squared bishops?
Yeah,
It looks like
they were traded.
simplifications central, right?
Yeah, and yeah, they were definitely traded. We can definitely click into that game. The other thing that's really interesting is f4 is really double edged. This move is not strictly necessary, but it's basically trying to trap the bishop on g5 in a very brute force way. And h6 g5 is an issue essentially in the next few moves. And right now, Honest, I think really concretely about how to deal with that. So, I just want to say, I said this was a 2 results game for White, and Salimova is playing it like I need to win because it's a very aggressive decision.
Yeah, can we rewind to? I'm a bit baffled as to how the light square bishops came off the board, because we left it at queen h5. We were very happy with White's position, f5, rook to b1. Couldn't stop praising that move. Rook to e1, c6. So far, so good, and queen c7. And this was the decision time, where we were wondering rook to e8, but bishop e8 played. Aha, getting the bishop a la French into the game. So the queen comes back to f3, and now, aha, bishop to f7, and now this is where the trade happens.
Yeah, and I also should point out that there were several moves in a row just now where bishop takes h2 was a possibility. And it's not played because actually the loss of time there is actually a really important factor because g3 would threaten to trap the bishop again, and White
Sorry,
would
yeah.
net the central pawn. So on
Yeah.
d5. So it's actually just not worth it to take that flank pawn when White will get the center pawn on d5. But it was another way to play the position.
Yes. It's an interesting one, actually. So, okay, bishop takes h2, dc4 chosen instead by Salimova. Bishop takes c4, bishop to f7, and this is where the bishops came off the board. I
Yeah.
guess it makes sense because you're going to get time, right, to use the e line.
Yeah, I mean the thing is if you if the bishops weren't traded, also black black had bishop d5 in the cards as well, and was controlling some of the business squares in the e-file. When we saw the f5 move, we said e6 and e5 are the real problems, and the bishops are covering those squares, and so
Mhm.
it becomes much less of a liability. And again, rook comes to e8. You start to feel good about yourself. Also, bishop takes h2 check is a thing, right? The pawn on d5 is gone, so all
Yeah,
those
you have to.
factors means that it's kind of, Anna's kind of hand was kind of forced there.
Yeah, definitely. Bishop rook takes f7, and now h3. And this is where we have this position f4. You know, that's the point of no return for that pawn. I'm a little bit worried that it can get rounded up. And at the same time, I was always taught that you shouldn't advance your pawns to block in the bishop on d6.
This is one of those moves that you're talking about, the younger generation. This is a move like that because it's extremely anti-positional. You putting a pawn on the same square as your opponent's bishop and as your own bishop, blocking the scope of your bishop. But you're tactically saying, I'm trying to trap, the bishop on g5 with h6 and g5, and if you don't concretely solve that problem, I will get away with it. And just I'm gonna beat you. So
Okay.
it's a really cool, calculated decision, and I wonder if it has something to do with the confidence she may have having beat her in the World Cup. It's like, I know what winning looks like against this great player. I'm gonna try and make something happen.
Yes, it certainly could. It was also very much Salimova's style to take concrete action. But this position is quite fascinating to me because I want to just try to do the Shankland rule, which is like think about the move you want and play it anyway. And that is rook to e6. I want to put my rook here and I want to be doubling up. And if you go h6, I'm just going to drop back to h4. And if you try to trap my bishop, I'm going to laugh at you big time because I'm going to say, well, that's come at the cost of your king. And I haven't worked anything out. This is just intuition or bluff.
Hey, intuition can take you a long, long way. So I'm big on that. Um, but yeah, what happens next will be the real question, right? Because
Like, for instance, if you go g5 now, I'm just thinking rook takes h6. Now I was g takes h5, and I've got, like, at least I was thinking queen h5. That was my move. And then rook to h8, queen to g6 coming. This is just too hot to handle for black.
it does look that way. I don't see checkmate off the bat, but I see a lot of loose pieces. The rook on a8 is loose. The bishop on d6 is a little loose. So I don't see mate, but I definitely see that this is probably too much. I think my concern is that if black can make a really good prophylactic move, like somehow bringing the rook
Mhm.
on 8 into the game and still introduce the idea of h6, I don't know.
Okay,
Like, this is what I'm
so,
not sure about.
okay, so rook e6, and now you move the rook somewhere. But where to put it into the game? Rook f8? Bishop f8?
Yeah, yeah.
Bishop f8, you
It's
don't get
funny.
mate?
I don't know where the square is, right? Because ideally you'd want rook d8, but you can't do that. Um,
No.
if you
Oh no, if
maybe,
bishop f8, of course you lose the pawn on c6. What am I on about?
yeah, but you know something, actually, the rook on c6 might actually be a little loose, because if you play something like rook c6, maybe on a good day I can try to pin you with queen b7 and still have the h6
Yeah.
g5 ideas. If you take with the queen, I'll trade queens and go h6 g5. So maybe taking on c6 is actually perilous.
Wow. Well, then that was a happy accident because I completely forgot that this bishop, of course, yeah, of course you can't do this, as you've pointed out. That's h6, bishop h4, and there is g5, and it's goodbye to this bishop. Yeah, no, that's actually, this is a serious question then. Bishop to f8. Let's go back to rook e6. Bishop f8.
Yeah, I
Rook takes
suspect.
c6. Queen
Yeah,
to b7. Oops. I see the
Yeah.
evaluation bar coming going
So what's
up the
wrong with
board.
queen b7? Oh, okay. I think queen b7 you allowed d5. Um, and the problem is that the rook is just well reinforced, and now the rook on b1 can try to get in the game to play bully ball on that f4 pawn. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, not enough, but still
Okay.
very unclear. And the queen could also have gone to d7 and remained tethered to the rook as well. And instead of b7, I think queen d7 is probably even more effective. And the
Okay.
point
Can
is,
we not go this?
yeah, but the point is that
Ah,
again, this bishop is not getting hit all the time. So, um, I mean, my instinct was something like just rook e8 and playing for compensation based upon the bishop being under fire. But I mean, or even queen f5 looks scary looking. So yeah.
yeah, queen f5. I was just thinking about that actually. Checks, captures, threats. It's one thing that I've been trying to train on. Uh, when I do my puzzles, I try to make sure that I have the system in place. So I look at all the alternatives and get queen to f5, and suddenly this pawn on d5 is loose. This bishop on g5 has got no squares. So wow, bishop f8. It's good enough.
Hey, we're seeing it in every game. This little prophylaxis, rook e8, bishop f8. These moves. You just add a little bit more near your king, and then But that is admittedly a very tough, savvy kind of hold the line type of move to find. Um, but this is what Salimova signed up for. So that's the type of, like, when you play f4, I'm just going to say it, emphasize it. This was not necessary at all. And it was a signal that she was ambitious because it's so anti-positional that you have to respect it, because you have to respect that ambition.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also have to respect that this bishop might be getting trapped at any stage of the game. Concrete reasoning behind f4. Like you say, this is very much a trademark of the younger generation. They don't care about ugly moves. Like in the past, it would be, oh, it looks ugly. Why would you even suggest such a thing? And now, absolutely. This is a critical idea, big plan of h6, g5 at the right time. And this bishop on g5 is just out there on a limb. So decisions for Muzychuk. And I can see the players have made some moves. So I'm going to go back and see bishop h4 played, bishop f8. They
Wow.
don't get mate.
Wow. Now it's a little bit different because rook e6 is not, rook e6, and then the pawn was not hanging on
Yeah.
c6 yet because the rook wasn't there. But still, it just shows a really good understanding of what needs to be done, right? The order of operations, right? I think a lot of players that are mere mortals would consider trying to trap the bishop right away, and it's not the way. You have to kind of trust that you have other things at your disposal to do first before you try to, really round up the material. And it's a good balance of like the kind of the sheer aggression, but also the like look both ways before you cross the street dynamic. Bishop f8 is definitely someone that's, has the full board vision.
Yeah. But she does allow rook to e6.
And then we might transpose to something we looked at before, or she might have the option of doing something else.
Yeah. But I was, I'm, I would lift my hat if she went h6. Just like that, leaving the c6 pawn, because who does that?
It's different. It's different.
Yeah,
These players are not normal players. It's different. The energy is different.
yeah, that is true. It's all about calculation. h6. So bishop f8. It's decision time now for Muzychuk. How to continue? For me, rook e6 would be irresistible. But yeah, you do have to also work out moves like queen to d7, going on the counterattack against this pawn on d4. This bishop on h4 still very much of liability. This game, I can see the evaluation bar is roughly in the middle, but it could swing either way. One bad decision from Muzychuk, and that's it. This bishop on h4 just could be trapped out of the game forever.
Yeah, and you said rook e6 a moment ago. We've been talking about this rook e6 move for white as a possible one, and I feel like we have to go to another game where we just saw rook e6, and it's in our all Chinese affair between Tan Zhongyi and Li Tengjie, because
Okay.
we got essentially we had this Carlsbad structure, and we talked about the dynamics between the the king side pawn majority for white and the queen side majority for black, and how counterintuitively a lot of the play comes from the side where you have less pawns, and it's actually come to bear. So
Yeah.
if we flick
Okay.
through this, so you're going to see something crazy.
So knight takes, bishop played, queen takes, and then after bishop e2, c6 played, getting those pawns on light squares, pointing towards the king. And now b4, so white is going for the minority attack, rook to e8, castles, queen to g5, big threat of bishop takes h3 on the board. So presumably the king dodged that, king to h1, and now knight d7. b5 regardless, knight takes c5, queen takes c5, rook to e6.
Sharpening up a little bit. So, right, we have some potential attack now on the G file. I can't say it enough how much, again, this little hook, this innocent H3 move becomes a little bit of a target, a little liability with this light squared bishop that black has, almost in the King's Indian-esque type of dynamic, frankly. Yeah, I mean, I think, this is a tough one to kind of navigate.
Like,
Uh,
for instance, if white does b takes c6, I was looking at just going rook to g6 just to highlight your point. And if white makes a move like bishop f3, I was wondering whether any sacrifices now, but there isn't.
yeah, I mean, it's funny because you almost need a little bit more. You need like this rook on a8 to be around, or just want a knight to be around. And I think ultimately that may be Lay's saving grace in the position, is that it's going to be hard to truly checkmate with not enough artillery. Um, and white might have visions of if we trade one or two pieces, particularly one of the heavy pieces, maybe one of the rooks or the queens, the structural advantages will come to bear, right? So, it's a tricky one. I think another thing to point out, that's sometimes a nice defensive maneuver for white in these positions, is it takes a moment. But if white's queen could get on to the h2 b8 diagonal, you have an additional defender. So don't be surprised if queen d6, queen h2, not possible yet. Even queen a5, queen c7, and then you can actually very, very seriously talk about white being better, because there'll be no attack whatsoever if the queen manages to shuttle over to the king side.
Yeah, that's actually one of my golden rules in chess. When your king is feeling the heat, trade queens. 9 times out of 10 works. It's
Yeah,
true.
yeah. And let's be real, I've also, by the way, I became I on the way to becoming an IM, I basically was very much a Caro-Kann player. And as a Caro-Kann player, you have to be comfortable in queenless end games and middle games. And so, I mean, that's just, word on the street is Caro-Kann players don't mind their end games.
No. They're trades. Trades are always favor the Caro-Kann player because it's just to do with space. We're playing with a lack of space, so therefore we need to make those trades in order to break out. So yeah, rook to e6. Rook to e6 is a key moment now for Lei, because does she want to enter into this whole thing, allowing rook to g6?
I think the
Will
question,
she just
honestly,
go b takes c6?
the question, honestly, to me is there a way for white to bail out? I think you can look at this position and say there are two things that are a little bit different. You were pointing out before the pieces in your camp that look kind of weird or awkward, and whether you're like, I don't like this piece. And there are two things that stand out to me. One is the king on h1. It's not normal that the king is on h1, and it might be more in the coffin there in the corner if any sacrifices happen. And then two, it's not so often you see a minority attack without the rook on a1 being involved on b1 or c1, just the queen. So the rook on a1, the king on h1, the queen on c5, all of these scare me, and I'm like thinking, how do I bail out? I don't know how to bail out. So to me, my instinct would be to kind of batter the hatches and kind of play bishop f3 and cover up the area, bishop f3, rook g1, kind of acknowledge that, you know, something didn't go great, and make sure that nothing kind of hits me. And actually in some positions, king h2 as well, because I might need to overprotect h3.
Right. Yeah. No, I can see. I can see this looks troubling because 3 is the golden number that we're taught when it comes to attacking the king. But somehow, you know, it will slow white down if you're going bishop f3. You're playing with one hand tied behind your back. I really just want to be getting in this. I want to get my structural weakness. Again, that's another trademark of the Caro-Kann player. And then after going rook to g6, bishop f3 is kind of forced. I need to keep this preserved. And using the king to step up to h2 to cover h3. And I
Right.
loved your idea of trading queens.
Right. I know you. I knew you would. Yeah, it's a Caro-Kann player. This is where our brains, for better or for worse, tend to go, Jovi. Right? Like for better or for worse.
Yeah, for better, for worse, it is all about the end game in the Caro-Kann. Oh, what an exciting game, and some exciting choices for Leiting J. And I think on that note, I think it's the perfect time to take us to a break. How will Leiting J react? And we'll find out after the break. But in the meantime, well, are you watching the stream without subscribing on Twitch? Well, you're missing out on all the emote action that takes chat to another level with sub-only emotes updating for every event. Your subscription unlocks reactions of players like Vaishali, Leiting J, and hosts like me. You can even use your Prime to claim a free subscription. So use !subscribe in chat now to level up.
The fourth cycle of the Variants Community Series is the most explosive variant yet, Atomic Chess, where every capture on the board triggers a fatal explosion for the pieces around it. 6 weekly arena tournaments, held every Thursday, will be followed by a championship event with cash prizes, including a $1,000 first place prize. The third and final weekly arenas will be streamer arenas, featuring gifted subs as prizes. Win any of these events to qualify for the championship and show the world what you've got. Join the Variants Club today to learn more about upcoming events, how to participate, and much, much more. See you in the arena on Chess.com.
Your subscription makes shows like this possible, which is why our Twitch subscribers will never see ads on Chess.com. Connect your Chess.com account and Twitch account at go.chess.com/connectaccounts, and bang, boom, voila, you're done. 100% ad-free bliss forevermore. Whether you're following our events on site or on stream, type the command connect in the chat, and thank you for helping bring these shows to life. We are live in Oslo, Norway. It's a beautiful day, a beautiful summer. You know the drill, we've done this before. Ma'am, do you mind if I ask you some questions real quick? When I say chess, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
Game, puzzle,
Puzzle. That's brilliant.
Chess, horse.
Smart.
Black and white.
Black and white. That's 2 words, but I'm gonna let it pass. If I say chess, what's the first word that comes to your mind? I don't know if I have any other questions for you. Okay, when I say strategy, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
puzzle,
Puzzle. Oh my God. Magnus Carlsen.
chess.
The answer was puzzle, actually. That was the correct answer. That's okay, though. Okay.
Yeah, I love chess.
You do love chess.
Yeah.
Do you play chess?
Yeah,
You,
sometimes.
you play chess online?
Yeah,
Where do you play?
chess.com.
You play on chess.com, of course. Do you know who Magnus Carlsen is?
No.
Okay. Could you name any world chess champion?
Vishwanath.
I knew you were going to say that. Obviously, you know who Magnus Carlsen is,
Sure.
right?
He's a hero.
You know how good he is?
The best?
Yeah, he's the best, right?
Yeah.
Has Norway changed now that Magnus isn't the world champion?
Yeah, it's kind of a bit more sad. Why?
Do you know that he's no longer the world chess champion?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I don't
So
really
you
know.
didn't know why you felt sad, and now you know why.
Yeah, I guess he'll get back up
He'll
there.
get back. Do you know why?
No,
He left chess to become a footballer.
actually.
Yeah, actually.
I think it's very different, chess and football.
Yeah. But he's an athlete, so he can pull it off.
It makes sense.
It makes sense, right?
I don't know who he is.
You don't know who Magnus Carlsen
No.
is? Okay. He's a professional footballer, one of the most well-known in Norway.
Okay.
Okay, so he.
Sorry, I'm not from here.
Okay,
I heard there was a huge chess tournament thing where he accused another player of cheating.
that's true. Do you know anything about that scandal? Have we done our job, Oslo? Oslo, they are an educated chess city, a city of deep-thinking people, a city of beautiful people, a city where chess comes to life.
And we are back in Toronto for the first round of the women's candidates, and it's been a tense start all around. We've had some games just explode into life. We have some dangers on the horizon. And of course, we need to revisit one of the games of the round. That is the All Indian encounter between women of the moment, Vaishali against Humpy Koneru. Now, Vaishali, 2023 was her golden year. She became a grandmaster. She won the Women's Grand Swiss, and now she finds herself here in Toronto with the white pieces against Humpy Koneru, who is quite frankly a legend of the game, one of the few women to have passed 2,600. She has also contended for the World Championship crown. She really is an experienced competitor. But having said that, she's only played in 2 candidates tournaments, and she's actually one of the oldest participants of the event. Do you think that age will have an impact?
I think it'll actually be a positive for her, just because she has so much experience in really high level games and also with really high level preparation. She's one of the players I always consider to be one of the most well prepared in the game, actually. So her experience in these structures and E4, E5 in particular is just really impressive.
Yeah, no, she's been playing this type of position for as long as I've known her. And, don't underestimate her at all. I know a lot of people have said, well, she's past her prime, 37. She took a break off in order to become a mother. But she does have a positive score against, I think, nearly all of the players in this competition. And she's been around for a long time. She's got strong nerves. And she's here. She has the confidence actually to attend this tournament alone. That says something about her. We see like some of the players have 2 seconds with them, but Humpy calmly said she has her routines. She has her helpers at home working for her. She's much more confident and comfortable being alone by herself.
Mm. Yeah, no. Well, you gotta be you gotta have a method to the madness there if you're doing it that way. So I'm looking at this position right now, and um, I feel it must be kind of a fine for both sides. The eval bar is essentially reflecting that. But one thing I'm actually a little curious about is why b5, because you see it in various structures in the Italian, um, but White was not threatening to play b5, and so it's a move that I I wouldn't do just because I like all my pieces covered, and then the knight on c6 is loose. And so I'm trying to understand the method of the method of the madness to the b5 move, and I'm wondering if it's maybe the only thing I can think about is maybe there was some concern about a knight coming to c4 and and tagging the e5 pawn. I don't know. Well, what do you think about that, Jovi?
Yeah, yeah, we just had a little bit of a musical interlude there, but I think it should be mandatory in commentary to have musical accompaniment to our words. Yeah, no, yeah, I agree with you. Pawn takes pawn, knight to c4. I was also wondering whether there was any c4 ideas just to clarify the pawn structure in the position as well. But certainly stopping a knight getting to c4 and targeting e5 would make the most sense. But what was Black's plan? Um, this is something that I would be asking myself for both sides.
Yeah, I
Is
think the
White
thing.
going to go bishop b2 and then kind of try to clarify in the center and again for play for c4? Is Black playing to go pawn takes pawn, in which case b5 doesn't make a whole load of sense?
Yeah, like so a few things. I think to me, I always just love this rook e8 bishop f8, because then when e takes d5 happens, if it ever happens, then the rook would be connected to the e5 pawn after a bishop takes d5. So the question that I was wondering about, with it being if it was White to move here, and it was not. Black played b5 in this position. If it was White to move again, is e takes d5 a threat? Is the
So
e5
let's
pawn
have a
an
look
issue?
at your rook e8. Let's have a look at that. What is White going to do? So you were worried about this, but then my answer would be I'd have to take because I have to go on the counterattack.
Oh, I see. I missed this knight takes c3 dynamic. I missed this knight takes c3 dynamic.
Yeah, but if, even though, if you could just go bishop b2, oh, we're coming on to f4. Whoops.
Yeah, it's funny because I thought I was thinking you had to take with the bishop, and then after the bishops were traded, take with the queen, and that's how you'd reinforce e5. So I wasn't even thinking about taking with the knight, and of course it's a much better move because you're hitting the c3 pawn. So that was a really nice find there. Um, but okay, rook e8 isn't on the board, right? So or it
No.
wasn't. I mean, it was White to move there. So
Yeah, it was White. It was White to move. Rook e8 wasn't played. b5 instead was played, and then the question becomes, what's the plan for White? I don't see any benefit whatsoever in taking that pawn on d5 because of knight takes d5, and now I've seen knight to f4 targeting d3. So let's just complete development with bishop to b2. Don't ask me what's happening next because I'm not quite sure. This is one of these positions where the two sides are just staring down at each other and just saying, clarify the position, please. So pawn takes pawn, and then the plan becomes very easy for White and for Black.
but
If queen to
actually,
d7,
yeah, this queen e7. So it's funny because in the previous position, right, we were talking about e5, knight d5, and the c3 pawn being hanging. So is e5 a threat now because the pawn is not? So like, let's say you make a nothing burger like rook b8 or something, maybe, or yeah.
okay, let me go back, and I just always preach to connect the rooks.
Yeah, no, of
That
course,
was,
same. But
yeah.
just to give an extra move to White, now is the e5 pawn hanging? I don't know if like knight takes d5, is knight takes e5 a thing?
Yeah, it could be.
So this would be the concern. This would be the concern that I'd have. Like, and is there still knight f4, and you have
Is it?
good excellent compensation on the d3 pawn. Okay. All right,
Yeah.
this is sharpening up a little bit. There's a little bit of a family fork here happening on d3. Um, but and to see that compensation, and to appreciate it is quite meaningful. We talked about these Rui Lopez, Marshall type of positions where you're a pawn down of activity. And here you could see it, that it's clear there's some activity. A few moves ago, if you don't see the knight coming to f4, you're less impressed with this. So every move, this is what black is kind of having to figure out.
Yeah. No. This is not to my liking. I gotta confess, allowing a knight to f4, because you could see I was getting over optimistic with the arrows. The brute in me wants to just play for checkmate.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah. So let's not take. But then this knight on d5 doesn't have a threat though against c3. Can we make a little move, queen c2?
I like queen c2.
Um,
You connect the rooks, like you say,
can
and
it,
then knight f4 is
and
less
but
harmful.
yeah. And then I can take the bishop and then force your knight back. But if I force your knight back, then I can take on e5.
That's right. That's right. So queen c2 is a nice one. So essentially, I think what we're finding out is white might have a few more useful, like, consolidating moves than black to make ed5 a threat. And so that's kind of the tug of war that's going to happen is black going to wind up releasing the tension because on e4 because white has these useful waiting moves, or is black going to be able to tactically defend it while keeping the tension? Maybe it comes down to the style of the players we're talking about. Humpy seems to be always been really a solid player, and she might be inclined to release that tension, not worry about those dynamics. But who knows? We'll see. I think ideally, in an ideal world, you want to have your cake and eat it too. Keep the tension, defend with tactics, but not trivial.
No, it's certainly not trivial. My instinct is to predict that Humpy will go for releasing the tension.
Yeah.
And especially in mind that she's playing Vaishali, who thrives in complications. Why not simplify the position? Because yes, after pawn takes pawn, bishop takes e6 is going to be met by a takes f3. And, well, I anything is happening here. I'm not really sure what's at all. I mean, do you go g6? I mean, I don't even know why I put the bishop on f5. Perhaps the bishop needs... Oh, this pawn on d3 is hanging. So this
Yeah.
bishop
This is a mess.
has to
This
go
is
to f5, or you can go queen takes f3, hitting... Oh, but this is very chaotic.
My instinct would be to bring the bishop back to b3 and just keep it on the long diagonal where it's not going to be touched. Because if you take on d3, I think I could take on f3, and I'm happy with that kind of tete-a-tete.
Pawn takes... It is a wild position. White's playing with an unsafe king. I don't think you'd play like this, to be honest. It's the first round of the candidates. It's the tournament of your life. You want to get off to a good start. So I think it's much more natural. So instead of bishop takes bishop, let's just go pawn takes pawn. Go for the easy life. And here you have that very straightforward plan of trading of the bishops now, and then maybe moving your pawn to a4 and trying to make this pawn on b5 a weakness.
Yeah, and I will tell you this. The way the games are shaping up, let's just remind folks, you get extra time after 40 moves. And so I see a lot of games that are not close to touching move 40, and a lot of folks that are... basically everyone is well under an hour. So, this game in particular, again, both players are at move, we're move 12 with 40 minutes each. It's really, again, they started with 90. So they've basically both used about half their time for a quarter of the moves, nearly a quarter of the moves, to get to the time control. So there's gonna be very interesting time crunches here, and I think you're gonna see a few players that are gonna have to pick up the pace or really trust their skills on increment. And so I think we're gonna get some really interesting scrambles in the next section or so, given the pace of play thus far. It's really unique time management.
Yeah, I think this is the first round nerves coming into play. They're being extra cautious. No one wants to lose their first round. Everyone is wary that, the others have had their training camps. They have come to the board armed to their teeth. So this is why I think we're getting that clock usage. It's very slow. I agree with you. I mean, the way that they're playing, we're going to be in for a time scramble of epic proportions here. And the position is just sharpening up as well. There's
Yeah.
so many decisions to be had. I mean, Bishop b2 played by Vaishali, and now Humpy will have to consider what is the full repercussions of taking that pawn on e4. Will she just simply go queen to d7, leave that tension in the center? But then again, is she playing into Vaishali's hands? Vaishali Thrill absolutely excels in these complicated positions. Decision time, and we're going to probably leave Humpy to that particular one. Oh, she's taken a decision, just as I say. And as I predicted, I'm proud to say pawn takes pawn played.
You're Humpy Koneru, that's for sure.
Yeah, she's been one of my idols. The way that she plays, so sometimes it's so simple, but with a lot of poison. And
Mm.
and it always comes from a good strategic foundation, and that's something that's very impressed me. It always feels like there's no risk, high reward, and quite frankly, that is the perfect way to play chess. So d takes e4, and now it's Vaishali's turn. Does she simply go pawn takes pawn? Does she try to get into the complications of bishop takes bishop? And we're going to leave this game for a while and go back to the bird's eye view, because we have 3 other exciting matches.
I feel like we should go to the all Chinese affair between Tan Zhongyi and Li Tengjie, because it's basically happened the way we suggested it would, but there's a little bit of an additional wrinkle, and it's a scary one because we didn't discuss this enough, and it was this H pawn, this alpha zero dynamic coming to the fray right now. We talked about White's defensive resource of getting the queen back to the king side. So we saw queen a5, which is something we were pointing out before, darting back to that long diagonal, h2 b8 diagonal, give some additional life support to that white king on h1. And we were talking about ways to add more to the black position. We're like, well, this rook on a8 is just, out of play, and it's hard to add more. And Tan Zhongyi said, no, we have the H-pawn to work with. And this H5 move creates all sorts of new issues, particularly using the H-pawn as a battering ram, not on the H file, but on the G file. So bishop G4 is a huge threat now.
How dangerous is it? Because queen a5 was played with your idea in mind of going queen c7, which when you mentioned it, I was all in. I'm a big believer in this. Queen c7, and if I just do that now, and if you go bishop to g4 and I go queens, time for the queens to come off. So I was thinking queen to e5 at the very least.
Okay, so you're insisting on that queen trade, and
Yeah.
I'll say this. If you play queen e5, I can at least say my pawn structure going into the endgame is not as disastrous as it would have been in previous circumstances where we were talking about trading queens. So
that's true.
I'm really enthusiastic about, taking on f3, taking on e5, playing c5, maybe rook e6, and all of a sudden, I'm not going to lose that game. So that's a real emergency break move. But let's say you get a little bit ambitious and you don't decide to trade the queens. Or you maybe play a passing move like rook c1 or something instead of queen c7. Bishop g4 is going to have a lot more impact because you can't take with the h-pawn, I don't think. So let's say you play like a move like rook b1 or rook c1 or something.
Okay, rook c1, but isn't bishop g4 like devastating here?
Yeah,
well,
I'm just
first off,
trying to
we need to
illustrate
answer the
it.
question. Well, let's answer the question. What happens if you go pawn takes bishop? You say,
Oh,
thank you very much for the piece.
Here we go.
Let's show why that is a terrible idea. So now what to do? Okay, I'm insistent. I want to keep my bishop on the board, and I'm going to let you do the honors here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a tactician, but I see an open h-line and I say yes, please. And rook h6 check, that's a yes, please. The king has to slide to the side. And then my queen's coming in. Queen h4, yes, please, threatening checkmate. And the only way to try and get out of the checkmate is pushing that f pawn, and then all of a sudden you push that pawn to f3 or f4, and the g pawn locks you in prison and tombs the king, and then queen h1 is a wrap. We can add some window dressing with a little spite check or two, but that's it. So the point is that by prying open that H file, it's just it's going to be traumatic for White's king to deal with, and so the emergency brake might very well need to be pulled. And again, we're talking about how to add to the attack, and this H5 lever is really, really impressive. It must also be said, we talked about H3 happening early in the game, and Black played the bishop to G4. The queen moved away, and then eventually White played H3 to cast it aside. And the rest of this game has been Black mercifully attacking based upon that hook. And so it's a really important feature of attacking positions, using your opponent's luft, their way they create an escape square for the king, as a way to sometimes open positions, particularly with bishops. And it's a very common feature in the Carlsbad.
Yeah, it certainly is. And just looking at other ways to try to hold this position, the only thing that I could see is queen c7 and desperately trying to get the queens off the board. Moves like the other kind of move that I'm seeing is like rook to g1, which looks terrible because I mean,
Bishop g4 still. Then what you
yeah,
still can't
I was wondering whether you could kind of go queen to h4 first,
Ooh, that is
threatening bishop
vicious.
takes h3. Yeah,
Oh my
I'm a
goodness.
cavewoman at times. And then if the king comes up, what next? Oh, hang on a second. Queen takes f2.
Yeah, I like
So
that. I like that. Snack
yeah,
on that. Um,
snack on that pawn, and that's good
even
enough for me.
even still, bishop g4. I mean, bishop g4 is the real. Every position, bishop g4 is going to be an issue. It's going to be a problem, and so, man, I mean, the only good news I think for Lei Ting-Jie right now is that there are defensive resources, and she's a bit further along as far as the move number is concerned, because I think we're on move 22 after h5. Got to get to move 40. But again, 30 minutes about for 18 moves. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. And so pulling the emergency brake might be in the cards here. And yeah, I'm just loving. I'm loving just the contours of the game.
Yeah. No, I think it's, I'm going to say it's the only try to go queen to c7. The others are just too high risk. Like rook ac1, when this bishop comes to g4, you'll start walking that tightrope. One bad move and that's it. You've lost the game. And again, look at the time as well. Lei Ting-Jie, 31 minutes. And what has she played? She's made a move. She's put her queen on c7.
Yeah, yep. It's logical, sensible, and I think the queen becoming a defender now, just in the nick of time. That's what we could say about this. Just in the nick of time. I guess the only question would be, is there a way you can try to keep the queens on? I don't
Well,
know.
on that subject, you were talking about bishop takes h3. And, I was just thinking about certain positions where you could drop a piece. You can put your queen on f6 or something, threaten bishop takes h3.
I like that.
And
I
then,
love that.
and then if the bishop comes back to e2, you say, well, put the bishop on f5. Maybe bishop comes to e4. Maybe this queen can come to e6 and slide over to grab some material at the right
Yeah.
time. Everything is done with the right time, of course.
That's scary. That's really scary. And
Yeah, maybe
yeah,
rook c8 first and force the queen back. Oh,
you know something. If this queen, I think the queen will probably wind up getting something like h2 or f4, one of these squares on these dark squares close to the king. I almost don't want to push it there. Strangely enough, I almost want to be like, don't come any closer. But it's hard to. It's hard. I mean, Black needs a few more moves to get this rook on a8 in the game, and
yeah.
that's really what's making this not a winning position, basically. Because if this rook on a8 was anywhere near the king side, it would be a different story.
Yeah, I just want to point out you don't want to make any move like bishop takes h5 because after rook h6, this pawn on h3 is going to be hanging with deadly effect. So yeah, queen to f6, bishop to g4 is also very tempting. And Lei Tingjie now on the back foot, but she has the long-term chances. If she manages to trade off queens, she will have a pleasant structure to work her magic against. And one thing we did see about Lei's type of chess is that she's more than willing to fight it out just to try to get that small advantage and nurture it through into an endgame.
Yeah, yeah. And I think as much as we've been seeing the praise of the, Tan Zhongyi's initiative here, I must say it does really feel like objectively there's no real attack as long as the queen swoops back. We see in every line the queen swooping back seems to make a huge difference. And it's one of those things again where, do you prefer long-term chances or short-term chances? Do you prefer the cost of individual moves to be really high, or do you prefer a longer type of game? Because I think our audience watching you pick either side of the position depending upon what your preference is. And I know, well, we were talking about this Caro Khan dynamic. I think the Caro Khan player, Jovi, would probably prefer the white side, right? Because if I turtle effectively and hold things together, I have a great long grind ahead of me, taking advantage of the 3 pawn islands that black has compared to my 2 and these little weak backward pawn on c6. But if you're an attacking player, you're like, man, 1 or 2 more moves and I am gonna hit home, and we're not gonna even get to a second time control. So it just comes down to what you like.
It certainly does come down to that, but I can tell you the white will be on tenterhooks over the next few moves because the price of an error is going to be incredibly high here. So queen to g, the bishop can come out to g4, queen can come back to f6. And also when it comes to style as well, Tang Zhongyi, word on the streets, I had this from On the Queen Side, who does a fantastic Twitter page on women's chess. He was saying that Jeffrey Zhong is the second of Tan Zhongyi, and Tan has actually said she really likes imbalanced positions, something that Lei also thrives in. So it's an interesting battle between these two. Who will be more comfortable here? We can see on the clock times that Lei taking her time now to just come up with moves. What do you predict for this? Do you see this fizzling out into a draw? Or do you see more fireworks to come?
I think it'll probably fizzle, but we might have a few twists and turns before we get there. So we can probably move on from this one for the time being, because this is a real inflection point as far as whether or not Zhongyi will be able to really go for it or not. But I see there's a knight on f5 in the Lagno Goryachkina game. And we were talking about this idea, or we were talking about the knights jumping around, but not in the way it happened here. So,
yeah, let's head there completely, because it seems, let's backtrack a little bit, because I'm curious how this knight came to f5. Presumably, there was a trade on g4, judging by the pawn structure. So we left it at knight to h2, bishop e6 played. I was actually expecting b5 from Lagno. Queen to f3, knight to e7, knight to g4.
So we got this right. We got that the knight was going to come, this knight h2, knight g4 plan to try and gin up some play on the king side. And Lagno, instead of playing b5 and kind of ignoring it, decided to kind of act a little bit prophylactically and make sure everything was covered. And it's funny because she played this move g6, which after this h takes g4, which seems to kind of prevent the knight from occupying the f5 square. And unfortunately for Lagno, Goryachkina very alertly noted the square the knight can still jump to that square, and it's a tremendous move. And I think now Goryachkina got the position. This is honestly the objectivity aside, this is the best position she's had all game, because it's the one that is basically up her wheelhouse, right?
Mm-hmm. she's going to live with that knight on f5 for the rest of time, because I'm just thinking h6 is a massive target. I mean, first up, you've got to defend it. And just for everyone at home, the reason why you don't want to be capturing that knight is because after g takes f5, well, maybe you do have to do something like this. It looks
The,
scary as anything, though. The
yeah,
bishop goes back somewhere. Let's put it on d7 just so that it doesn't. And then how to continue the attack, because here my brain just switches off and goes, red alert, king is in danger, cluster of pieces that can't get to black's aid. How to continue? Queen
yeah.
h5,
I would play rook e3 just
rook
because
e3.
I think I'm gonna move the rook regardless. I don't know where the queen is more useful yet. I don't know if it's more useful on g4 or on h5, and I know the rook is gonna need to lift. It's funny, if this bishop on f1 was anywhere near a reasonable square, it'd just be a winning position. Like if the
Yeah, if
bishop
it
was
was
on
over there on
c2 or
b3 or
b3,
c2,
right?
it could come to b3 and that's it, ka-ching.
Right. So it's really it's not like a checkmating attack right away, but the problem is that it's almost like a slow burn. If white is able to the pawn f5 essentially cuts off the bishop on d7. And so one defender is really kind of is offside. And if white just is able to mosey in a few moves, it can really be devastating. Like what you're saying, like queen h5, rook g3. I mean, do you have time to play a bishop maneuver like bishop e2, d1, etc.? Do you have time for d4 pawn sack and bishop c4 in the right
Yeah.
circumstance? Who knows?
Well, one of the reasons why I've been sat next to David Howell for quite a few years, and he has this fantastic expression when it comes to defense. And he goes, "A knight is a king's best friend." So this expression is just like stuck with me through the ages. And one of the reasons I didn't want to play rook to e3 because I was afraid of king to h8 and then this knight coming to g8. Knight is a king's best friend. Plus, if anyone wants to check out how a knight tortured me, it was against my one of my friends, Nicholas Pert, in the 4NCL. He had his knight stuck right next to his king, and I just could not even get a check. So, yeah, knight to g8 would be my kind of give up. You know, if you allow h5, give up that pawn on f7 just in order to get that knight to a nice defensive square.
100. I see it now. It makes a lot of sense. So question for you. If the queen went to h5 right away, is the idea that king h8 is not
Sorry.
possible because of bishop h6?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you go king h8, I go bishop takes h6, and you can't get your knight to g8.
Okay,
So you're
that
going to
order
have
of
to do something
operations.
else.
Yeah, that order of operations is huge. That's like a massive difference. So it basically
Yeah.
prevents the knight from coming over. So scary hours. But can we go back for a second before g6? So after h takes g4, I think on move 16 there, because
Mhm.
it's such an instructive thing that this if you before g6, right? If you just play after h8, so the idea was right to defend against the impending knight coming to f5. And so often in chess, you hear this old dogma: if someone's playing on the flank, you play in the center. And d5 here would sufficiently distract white where they couldn't just ignore what was going on that side. And you also when you also give the knight the g6 square, which means that your knight also has access to f4 in some positions, and even your queen has access to h4 in some positions. And so by playing g6, you kind of cut off some of your pieces from potentially migrating over to critical kingside squares to kind of stop the onslaught of the white
Yeah.
initiative. And it's one of those things where you kind of you deal with something by pushing a pawn on the side where there's potential trouble. Whereas so often you see that when someone's trying to push on that side, if you defend or try to push pawns aside, it actually makes it worse. And I think this is like a perfect example of that. Spectacular example though. At knight f5 is a bolt from the blue, but it's like don't always push pawns on the side where you're getting harassed, especially near your king.
I totally agree with you. Knight f5 must have been just one of those blind spots. She just assumed there's no way a knight can get to f5, but wow. Sam Shanklin's rule. play what you want to play and find a way to make it work. Now, I do see a move was played by Lagno, and I think